Emily Foster had always been the type of person who kept to herself. She lived in the same quiet neighborhood for 8 years, but had never really gotten to know anyone beyond polite waves from across the street. She worked remotely as a data analyst, which meant she rarely had a reason to leave her home. Her days were filled with spreadsheets, muted conference calls, and the occasional grocery trip. Life was predictable, safe, but lately, she had started feeling an itch for something new, something that would push her out of her comfort zone. It started one Saturday morning in early spring when she found herself staring out her kitchen window, watching her neighbor, Mark Bennett, work in his yard. He was focused, methodical, and seemed to know exactly what he was doing. She didn't know much about him except that he was around her age, maybe a few years older, and had moved into the house next door about a year ago. From what she'd observed, he was the kind of person who always had some project going on, whether it was repairing his porch railing, building a planter box, or repainting his shutters. That morning, Emily had been trying and failing to assemble a small bookshelf she'd bought online. The instructions were a mess. Half the pieces looked identical, and she was sure she'd already put one of the panels on backward. She looked down at the jumbled mess of wood and screws on her living room floor, then back outside at Mark confidently measuring a piece of lumber before cutting it with precision. She hesitated, biting her lip. She didn't like asking for help, especially from someone she didn't know well. But something about the way he worked made her think he might actually enjoy teaching her. Before she could talk herself out of it, she grabbed a notebook and pen, telling herself she'd write down instructions so she wouldn't have to bother him twice, and walked next door. Mark looked up when he saw her approaching and straightened from where he'd been crouched over his workbench. "Hey there," he greeted with an easy smile. "Morning." "Hi," Emily said, suddenly aware of how awkward this was. I'm Emily. From next door." "I know," he said with a small chuckle.
Mark.
"Nice to officially meet you." She took a deep breath. "I was wondering, could you maybe teach me how to put something together? I'm struggling with a bookshelf and you seem to know what you're doing." His eyebrows lifted, and she thought she saw the corners of his mouth twitch.
Sure.
"I like a good project. Do you want me to just do it for you, or do you actually want to learn?" "I want to learn," she said firmly. "If you don't mind." Mark nodded.
All right.
"Let's start with the basics." They went back to her living room, and Mark crouched beside the scattered parts. He explained how to sort pieces before starting, how to read the instruction diagrams, and even a few tricks for lining up screws so they wouldn't strip the wood. Emily scribbled notes in her notebook, determined to follow every step exactly. What she hadn't expected was how patient he was. Every time she made a mistake, he didn't sigh or roll his eyes. He simply walked her through it again until she understood. By the time the bookshelf stood proudly against her wall, she felt an unfamiliar mix of pride and gratitude.
"See?
You did all the work," Mark said, stepping back. "I just guided you." Emily smiled. "Well, thanks to you, I didn't destroy it." After that day, it became a sort of tradition. Every week or so, Emily would ask Mark to teach her something new: how to fix a leaky faucet, how to patch a hole in the wall, even how to plant herbs in a small garden bed. At first, it was just about learning practical skills, but slowly, the lessons began to mean more. They became moments she looked forward to, a break from the monotony of her everyday routine. But one Saturday afternoon in late summer, Emily decided to push herself a little further. She had seen Mark working on a complex wood carving in his garage, intricate designs etched into a slab of cedar, and she was fascinated. She'd never tried anything like it before, but the precision and artistry called to her. When she knocked on his door that afternoon, she held her notebook tightly against her chest. "Mark," she said when he answered, "I want to learn how to do that. The carving you were working on." He gave her a long look. "It's not easy," he warned. "Takes a lot of patience." "I'm willing to try," she said. They set up in his garage, the scent of cedar filling the air. Mark showed her how to hold the carving tools, how to angle the blade just enough to remove thin shavings without cutting too deep. It was harder than she expected. Her first few attempts were uneven, messy, and she nicked her finger once when she lost focus. "Slow down," Mark advised gently. "It's not a race. Every cut matters." She nodded, biting her lip in concentration. For the next hour, she tried to follow his instructions exactly, but her lines kept going crooked. Frustration bubbled up inside her. She wanted to prove she could do this, but the more she tried to force it, the worse it got. Finally, she dropped the tool onto the workbench with a sigh. "I can't do it," she muttered. Mark leaned against the bench, studying her. "You're trying too hard. You keep thinking about the finished piece instead of focusing on the cut you're making right now." Emily frowned. "So what do I do?" He smiled faintly. "Start over. But this time, don't think about the end. Just focus on one cut at a time." It sounded simple, but it wasn't. She spent another hour slowly carving, her hands trembling at first, then growing steadier as she stopped worrying about the big picture. When she finally stepped back, her piece wasn't perfect, but it was far better than she'd expected. Mark looked at it, then at her. "Told you. You just had to slow down." Something about his words stuck with her long after she left. She realized she had been rushing through so many parts of her life, work, conversations, even her own thoughts, always focused on getting to the next step instead of being present in the moment. Over the following weeks, Emily practiced the carving whenever she could, and slowly, she got better. One crisp autumn morning, she brought her finished piece to Mark's porch. "This is for you," she said, holding it out. "It's not perfect, but I went further with it than I thought I could." He took the carving and smiled warmly. "It's perfect because you put the work in." As Emily walked back home, she realized that asking him to teach her had started as a way to fix a problem, but somewhere along the way, it had changed her. She had learned more than just skills. She had learned patience, focus, and the value of slowing down, and that was worth far more than any bookshelf or carving she could ever make.